You ever stop and think about what really makes your phone, your laptop, your whole digital life actually work? I mean, it's not just the plastic and metal, right? It's the silent brain behind the screen, the operating system. And let me tell you, that brain didn't just pop into existence. Today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of how it evolved, one generation at a time.
Right? It's a fascinating question. I mean, try to picture it. A machine with all this amazing potential, but no instructions, no manager, no consciousness. That was the real deal for the first computers. It was basically just a big hunk of metal. And to get from that to the slip devices we carry around today, we first had to figure out how to give the machine a mind.
So, what exactly is an operating system anyway? Well, here's a great way to think about it. It's kind of like the conductor of an orchestra. See, the conductor doesn't actually play an instrument, right? But they're the one making sure the violins, the drums, the brass, in this case the processor, the memory, the storage, all work together in perfect harmony. It's the foundational software that makes literally everything else possible. It's the boss. Okay, so this image here, this is basically our roadmap for the journey we're about to take. The story of the OS really unfolds across these four distinct generations. And what's cool is that each era faced its own unique fundamental problem. The solutions that engineers cooked up, that's what pushed computing forward into the world we know today. So let's start at the very beginning.
All right, Section 1. We're heading back in time to the age before the OS. We're talking about an era of giants. I mean, literally room-sized machines humming with power, where the whole idea of an operating system was still pretty much science fiction.
So, looking at our roadmap, we are right here, the first generation from about 1945 to 1955. This was the age of vacuum tubes and these crazy things called plug boards. So here was the big problem back then. Everything was a manual, physical task. I mean, we're talking raw complexity. There were no programming languages like we have today. If you wanted the computer to do something different, you had to physically rewire it. Just imagine that. Every single calculation was this slow, painstaking process of plugging and unplugging cables. I mean, these first-generation machines were truly like something from another planet. They were absolutely enormous, filled with thousands of super hot, totally unreliable vacuum tubes that could burn out at any second. And since there was no OS to manage anything, programmers had to use this super low-level machine code, first with those plug boards we mentioned, and then later with punch cards. The computer simply couldn't manage itself. It needed a human to do everything. So, as you can imagine, this whole manual process was just incredibly inefficient. A solution was desperately needed, and thankfully, it arrived with the second generation. This was really the first major leap in getting computers to manage themselves. Okay, let's look back at our chart. Here we are now, in the second generation, roughly 1955 to 1965. This whole era was defined by two total game changers, transistors and the first real operating systems, called batch systems. So, we solved one problem, but a new one popped up. Wasted time, a massive amount of it. Just think, every single moment a human operator spent physically setting up the next job, this multi-million-dollar machine was just sitting there, completely idle. The challenge was obvious. How in the world do you keep this incredibly expensive hardware running all the time? And the solution was the batch system. Now, this was only possible because of a tiny little invention called the transistor. See, transistors made computers way more reliable than those old vacuum tubes. Now that you had machines that could actually run for hours without breaking down, you could finally line up a whole batch of jobs and just let the computer chew through them one after another. No more waiting for a human in between. And the process itself, well, for its time, it was revolutionary. So here's how it worked. Instead of every single programmer running their job one by one, a single operator would just collect everybody's punch cards. They'd load them all onto a magnetic tape. This whole batch would then get fed to the computer, and a very basic, primitive operating system would take over, running each job in order. And the results? The machine was always busy, and efficiency just went through the roof. So, the batch system was a huge step forward, for sure. But, you guessed it, a new bottleneck popped up pretty quickly. This is what led us to the third generation, and a truly revolutionary idea that is, no joke, central to how pretty much all modern computers work today. And that brings us right here, the third generation, 1965 to 1980. This era was powered by the incredible shrinking power of integrated circuits and this brilliant new concept called multiprogramming.
But here we go again. Solving one bottleneck just revealed another one. So even with the batch system, whenever a job had to do something slow, like reading from a tape or printing something out, what we call an I/O or input-output operation, the super powerful main processor would just sit there, completely idle, waiting. It was a new, much more subtle kind of wasted time.
The solution was something called multi-programming. And honestly, the best way to understand it is to think about a cook in a kitchen. You know how when you're waiting for a pot of water to boil, you don't just stand there staring at it, right? Of course not. You start chopping vegetables for the next part of the meal. Well, that's exactly what multi-programming is. If one job is stuck waiting for a slow I/O task, the operating system is smart enough to switch the processor over to a different job. It was true multitasking for the first time.
And you might be asking, what was the big hardware leap that made all this possible? Well, it was the integrated circuit. By figuring out how to pack hundreds of transistors onto a single tiny chip, machines like the famous IBM System/360 suddenly had the horsepower to run these really complex operating systems that could handle true multiprogramming. And they could do it all in a smaller, more affordable package.
Okay, think about it. All of these incredible innovations, the transistors, the batch systems, the integrated circuits, multiprogramming, all of it was building towards one single thing: the personal computer. The revolution that was about to put the power of a massive mainframe right on your desk at home. And here we are. We have finally arrived at the fourth generation on our map, stretching all the way from 1980 to today. Welcome to the era of the personal computer. So what were the last big hurdles? Well, it all came down to size and cost. And the solution was something called large-scale integration. This is where engineers figured out how to cram not just hundreds, but thousands and eventually millions of transistors onto a single tiny silicon chip. This incredible invention was the microprocessor, and it's what made computers so small and so cheap that, for the first time in history, a regular person could actually own one. The impact of this? It was absolutely world-changing. Suddenly, you have computing power in the hands of millions of people. So what's the next logical step? Well, you connect them all together, of course. This explosion of computer networks created a need for entirely new kinds of operating systems, things like network operating systems and distributed operating systems that were built specifically to manage our new, incredibly interconnected world. So there you have it. That's the journey. We went from room-sized calculators to a global network that literally fits in our pockets. 4 generations, and each one was defined by a huge problem and an even more brilliant solution. But, the story doesn't end here. So let's just quickly recap the big theme here, right? We went from back-breaking manual labor to full-on automation. We went from running one single job at a time to true, seamless multitasking. And, most importantly, we went from computers being a tool for giant corporations to a personal device for every single one of us. Each and every step was all about making computers smarter and more efficient.
Which, of course, leaves us with one final and I think really exciting question. While we technically call the 4th generation current, a lot of people would argue that we're already writing the 5th generation right now. With AI, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, the very definition of what a computer is and what its brain does is changing all over again. So I'll leave you with this. What do you think the defining problem and the next revolutionary solution of this generation is going to be?